Hi, I'm Lars-Erik sitting here with Michael Salin on Skype, producing a first introduction to the Royal Swedish Academy of War Sciences and its 3-year project on Sweden and European security. Michael is chair of the Department 6 of the Academy dealing with security policy and is responsible for that part of the project. I'm deputy to him and editor of our products in the project. In this first podcast, we will give you a more personal background to our own engagement in the project, to be followed by a description in the second part of the podcast of the structure of and purpose of our current work, focusing on the southern dimension of European security. This will then later be followed by a focus on the eastern dimension and then the western, including the transatlantic issues, to come back to the northern situation towards the end of the project. We will of course also devote a lot of time to the situation on the European level, including the transition to new leadership in the European institutions, to the interaction between the regional powers in Europe, and of course the impact of Brexit. We will also in the coming podcast highlight the first products of the project, which is one small booklet including presentations made at the Winter Symposium of the Academy this year, focusing on our part of the project, and also a report on the Middle Eastern situation using a scenario analysis starting in Idlib in Syria, which is unfortunately coming true as we speak. Might start by trying to explain briefly to me what this academy is all about and what is the project all about, because many people probably have a somewhat strange assumption that what an Academy on War Sciences is about is to prepare for war, not for peace. Whereas, of course, we, particularly in the civilian side, on the security policy side of the Academy, have another perspective on our role.
Well, the entity, the Royal Academy of War Sciences, is an old-timer since the time when all these institutions were founded in Sweden, 18th century. In the contemporary world, the Academy assembles representatives of the military establishment, whether retired or active, and the diplomatic establishment and the defense research establishment, thirdly. And we are some 400 or so members altogether, and the sixth department or section is dealing with security policy. Other departments are dealing with civilian defense or defense industry or the 3 armed forces. So security policy is what we do. We are a membership of ex-diplomats, active diplomats, researchers, others, such as you and me, with a background in the foreign ministry, but with a very varied experience from various institutions. In my case, Parliament, Department of Defense, Department of Foreign Affairs, EU, abroad, at home, and you have at least the similar variety. And we are dealing now with a 3-year project called Security in Europe and Sweden's contributions to it. We have this Department 6, which does deal with security policy in the broadest sense. And I think that some of us, including you and me, are going to develop that concept of making the civil-military balance more balanced than it has tended to be the case over the years. So I'm very optimistic that we are going to do something really useful.
The topical issue for us now possibly may be the fact that we are in a period when the balance between territorial defense and the broader concept of security, what we need to do in terms of international operations, etc., etc. All of that seems to be under new scrutiny. The point is that we are in a very difficult situation right now. We have found out that territorial defense has been something that has been neglected for a pretty long period of time due to perhaps undue optimism what would happen after the Cold War. And this has succeeded a period of a lot of international operations and a certain sort of optimism that you could solve problems through international operations and that Sweden should be a part of these international operations. And at the same time we had lowered our defense budget, so we used to be at 5% in the 50s of the GDP, we were at 3% in the 80s, and now we are at 1% basically. And there are so many competing demands on already in the security sector. There are other competing demands with military defense. So maybe it's good for us to discuss this in the academy, and also in particularly in this department section 6. With people like yourself, and you have spent a lot of time in Sudan as a representative. You have been an EU representative in what is now North Macedonia. You have been ambassador in Belgrade. You have been ambassador in Turkey, etc. So you have lived through quite a number of important situations in the north-south dimension of security policy and defense policy, which I thought would be very useful to bring into this project that we are now starting up in the academy.
Having served both in the Ministry of Defense but also in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in this period of transition from the conditions of the Cold War, some of which themes have re-emerged now, and we'll talk about that. And then into the various aspects of crisis management and peace operations. I was the general director of Folke Bernadotte Academy also, which was an institution in Sweden for those purposes. So for me, it's a fascinating journey in very muddled and stormy waters in a way, but all the time with a sort of positive basic outlook. And then only to find that, oops, we were a little bit too optimistic, or at least some were. And then as from 2007, the Munich speech by Mr. Putin and onwards, there have been all these steps that have demarcated the trend. And now it is commonplace to say, and it was said in the Swedish paper only the other day, I read it today, but also by many others, that the situation now is in a way even more dangerous and threatening than used to be the case in the relatively stable Cold War conditions. So it's a long journey, and it is so important to pile up and try to make something useful out of these various experiences.
Yeah. Well, my experience, of course, from coup d'etat is limited to a very short period in Angola in the late 70s, which was, for me, in a sense, a naive period when you still thought that you could do things with assistance, international assistance, and things would automatically be better if you spent a lot of money in a certain country. But the whole issue of sustainability of development and so on, and how you deal with the fact that you had a civil war, a brutal war, which was to a large extent related to strategic resources and competition for those resources. This was possibly relevant today because, of course, we have, in Africa, lots of situations of that kind still today. But we have on top of that a militarization of the entire southern dimension with the Middle East and so on, with a very high level of militarization and also nuclearization potentially with proliferation, which certainly is not irrelevant even for the great powers, but of some almost existential importance for some of our southern partners in Europe. What we have seen in the previous years is a project called KV21, which was organized with the support from a research foundation, which was very much focusing on the area close to Sweden and what the defense establishment should look like in the new Europe. And now we have a new project which is called Sweden in the European security of tomorrow, so to say, and this gives us an opportunity over 3 years to widen the perspective, and that's what we then I suppose would hope to do, using these experiences that not only you and I have in our section, but there are a lot of people who have had very prominent roles in international institutions, organizations, and also for Sweden, in the UN system, etc., etc. My own experience is, of course, mainly then from an EU perspective over the years from 96 to 2011, when I, from Brussels and from Vienna, representing the EU there, had the responsibility to see what the EU could do in terms of conflict prevention and conflict resolution, crisis management, etc., etc. So that if we marry these perspectives, you having been more in the field than I have been in the headquarters in Brussels and Vienna in a period when people were hopeful, that still very hopeful until maybe until 2007, as you mentioned, the Putin speech, that we could do wonders, so to say, and that we could create a better future without focusing too much on the pure military. In fact, we said in the European security strategy from 2003 that there are no military solutions actually alone. I mean, broader solutions must always be sought. You are listening to an e-learning light podcast produced by Lars-Erik Lundin for Lundin och Bäcklund AB. Copyright.